So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn on performance-based funding in post-secondary education. Your political action and member education committee members, so myself, the chair, Prachi, Quinn, Nicole, John, Nath, Mira, Tristan, and Matt. Thank you all for coming, and we are hosting a regular monthly Lunch and Learn series in light of the difficult circumstances that the University of Alberta is facing and NASA members are facing. So I want to give a quick introduction to our talk and to our speaker today. So last year, the government of Alberta announced that post-secondary education was moving towards a performance-based funding model, although it's been put on hold temporarily due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But what does this performance-based funding model mean, and what impact does it have on staff? Performance-based funding models essentially put conditions on public funding towards universities through indicators such as research activity, enrollment, employment rates after graduation. And if the university falls short on any of these indicators, it risks losing part of its funding. Instead of creating greater accountability and transparency, performance-based funding actually risks creating excessive bureaucracy and threatens critical thinking and creative research in the university. So this model sees a shift towards a neoliberalization of the university, where emphasis is placed on market gains and market competitiveness, rather than the spirit of learning and education. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Marc Spooner to speak a little bit more about this topic with us today. Marc is a professor at the University of Regina in the Faculty of Education. His interests include audit culture, the effects of neoliberalization and corporatization on higher education, social justice, activism, and participatory democracy. Marc has also been writing a lot about the performance-based funding model, especially in Alberta, and has been featured in the Edmonton Journal. So with that, we will take it away to Marc. So thanks so much, Marc, for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction and for the opportunity to share with you today. You know, I wish I could tell you this was my COVID beard, but it's that'd be a lie. The University of Alberta has been a place that I've loved to visit. I've gone on many occasions and I have many colleagues there, and I care a lot about the work that the university does. It's a wonderful opportunity to be invited by NASA, and I think the fact that I'm being invited by a non-academic staff association speaks volumes about how we're all part of the same team as in the institution of higher learning, that it depends on well-running faculty and staff working together to better serve students and our communities and society. So kudos to you. I'm really excited and pleased to be able to share with you for a few minutes today on your lunch hour. So please feel free to eat at your leisure. There may be kids in the background. That could happen. Welcome to what we're all used to now, I guess, the isolation reality. I know my eldest son was sneaking around earlier, but so far it seems to be quiet again. I guess the first part I can say is this is not a time to wait or to play nice. It's a time to organize and work in collaboration with as many partners as possible. So that would include, you know, your faculty association and other unions across the province. This is not a time to wait. The changes are happening so rapidly and the cuts are so massive. I've seen, you know, the numbers can be tinkered with, but essentially you're looking at from 2019 to 2023, a loss of 1,000 staff members and about 163 million in public revenue. So these are massive cuts, unprecedented cuts, and the time is not to be, you know, wait and see or to play nice. This is not going to work. There will be none of you left by the time the cuts are done. So my talk is about performance-based funding, but I want to put that in context and to maybe explain a bit about what performance-based funding is and put it in the context of what's happening to universities globally. This is happening around the world. It's not new. In fact, these ideas have been tried for the last 30 years in the UK. They've been forging ahead at great speeds in Australia and other countries. So the very models that you're using, we have data on that. We've seen what can happen. The thing about explaining performance-based funding, it's hard to keep track because the government keeps running ahead, rushing through these ideas, and then backtracking as they see that they make no sense. So we saw that just yesterday. Again, a really big one, the expenditure cap was lifted. That performance measure was lifted, which that measure really was nonsensical, because what that measure would have done is all of the research money that faculty would have brought in, all the extra monies that would have been brought into the university would count under your expenditure cap, which would create this perverse incentive that your university would be punished in a way for doing research, because all the extra money they brought in would be then taken off the money they would get from the government. And that's the thing about performance-based funding. They have all kinds of perverse incentives and really redirect the university. They reimagine the university in a way that's subtle and not so subtle. So to get into it, so basically performance-based funding just means having, usually it's about 10 indicators or categories, fields where the university will be judged, their performance will be judged against these indicators. And I can't tell you the exact indicators because the government keeps changing their mind, although we get glimpses of where they're thinking. For example, when they first rolled out these ideas and the Janice McKinnon Blue Ribbon Report, we could see that they were heavily focused on labor market issues. So whether your grads were being employed, at how much money, what kind of salary income were they getting. Those, it seems to me, they've retreated because COVID has really exposed the folly of these kinds of indicators, because the university doesn't control the labor market. So it's hardly something that they should be rewarded or punished for, just like Alberta shouldn't be rewarded or punished for the price of oil. No government can really determine that on their own. And so these are things that are not in the control of the university, of you. Other indicators I've seen, recently the Minister of Advanced Ed put out an op-ed in the Edmonton Journal, and that's not today's. There's another excellent piece today by a University of Education faculty member, Kent Tahoya, I think his name is. But some of the things that he was talking about is employer satisfaction with graduates. Your advanced minister was saying these are things they want to measure: employer satisfaction with graduates, which would be very difficult to measure. First of all, graduate skills, again, what does that mean? Certainly you can expect that grads are going to have to learn the intricacies and the specialties of any job and corporate culture that they get, that they attain. Even teachers, I work in the faculty of ed, we mostly do a pretty excellent job of training teachers, but once they get to a school, there's different focus. Their students change every year. They have to learn different skills that we can only kind of prepare them for learning, for this future learning. And that's what universities really do well. We prepare grads for future learning that they then can specialize in when they work in whatever employment sector that they get employed in. Another one that the minister talked about is work integrated learning opportunities, sort of co-ops or internships and practicums. The thing is, universities have already been doing lots of work in this area without this need for performance indicators. Universities want to attract and retain students. That's their business. They need to retain and attract students, so they're going to offer services and programs that students benefit from. And like I said, it keeps changing. Just yesterday, the minister had changed the expenditure cap. That performance indicator got lifted because it didn't make any sense, just like they are sort of, it seems to me, backtracking on employment and income outcomes. Those indicators are also backtracking because, again, COVID has exposed that they really don't make a lot of sense since the university doesn't control those factors. But what performance indicators essentially do is they perform roughly three functions. One, they're cloaked funding cuts. That's what they are. There's a no-win situation here. If you attain 100% score on all of the indicators, however ill-conceived they are, you're still going to have your funding cut. And uh, it's set up so that you won't get 100%, so you'll get your funding even reduced more than the cuts that they've already announced and the cuts that are coming. So that's number one. These are just cloaked funding cuts under the auspices of accountability and transparency, which they perform neither. They either create this weird sense that you blame yourselves for not attaining well. Oh, we should have did better, even though the measures are ill-conceived and often not in your control. And it sets up a competitive model so that you're now competing against other institutions in your province that you should be collaborating with. You're now in competition for the meager funds that the province is doling out. And lastly, and perhaps most profoundly, they fundamentally changed the mission of the university. So you go from an institution that both staff and faculty work towards creating really citizens who are well informed, they're critical and creative, they're prepared for future learning, they become well-rounded citizens capable of operating in a changing world. And the university as an institution is set up to do research that's mainly in the public interest. You're there to serve the communities in which you reside and our greater society, and we all benefit. And a prime example is the wonderful COVID research that's happening right now at the University of Alberta. So you go from that to being essentially relegated as a work skills training center, because you're getting rewarded and you're being shifted subtly and not so subtly into concentrating on labor market. You got to serve the labor market. But the problem with serving current labor market needs is, one, it takes usually 4 years for students to graduate, and two, the labor market continues to change. So what you don't want to have a rigid set of skills. What you want is students who have a good foundation, and then they're prepared for future learning. They can adapt quickly, be flexible, these kinds of skills that universities really excel at. So, and then in terms of research, they end up under these performance metrics, often the research is very targeted. So it's serving sort of economic and corporate needs rather than societal needs. So those are the three functions, I'd say. Again, performance-based funding essentially is a cloaked funding cut. You end up blaming yourself and competing against yourself and other organizations, and they fundamentally change the mission of the university. Now, to better understand where do performance-based funding, where does it come from? Why are we talking about this now? This is all part of a process that's been happening since Margaret Thatcher with the public sector, with public sector institutions, and it's called new public management. And essentially in new public management, what happens is you end up adopting private sector management practices. So the university is really founded upon collegial, collaborative, shared governance models, but instead you get more top-down corporate style management practices. And you could even see that. I watched your town hall, and I want to talk about the restructuring that's about to happen later on in my talk. But you get market style incentives and disincentives, which is exactly what performance-based funding does. You're introducing incentives and disincentives. And so it's another element of government control over something that should be free. It should be discovery driven and able to serve society in multiple ways, not just the targeted narrow sort of vision that the current government appears to have. It's customer oriented. So you get this consumer choice and branding. You devolve budget functions, but you maintain tight control over auditing and oversight. You outsource labor with casual temporary staff, which is of great concern to your union, your association, this will happen. You try to get staff as cheaply and as sort of uh, temporary as possible, instead of creating positions where people can actually feed their families and work in a long term at a common goal, which is to serve society, which is really, there's no better goal. Um, then you get this emphasis on greater output performance measures and controls in the name of efficiency and accountability, which is all of these things you can see are happening as the government shifts to these new performance management styles and techniques, which aren't new. Um, that's what's happening at the University of Alberta right now. Your new restructuring will result in massive layoffs. The Nous group that's been touted is a consulting firm which will be hired to carry out the new public management agenda. And really, there's nothing new here. That's the kind of ironic, sad part. These are tired, broken ideas that have already failed elsewhere. They result in more red tape, more money being diverted away from the university's traditional mission and into these, like I said, funding cuts, staff layoffs, and then really narrowing the focus of what a university's ought to do. The mission gets transformed all of a sudden into, like I said, a labor training camp where the only research that really takes place is targeted and corporate styled. I've seen, like I said, the president's address. I think he sounds like a really nice guy. I'm not judging his character in any way, but the restructuring program that he's talking about and the models they're using, and especially the Nous group, which is using the UK and Australia as the model for what they hope the University of Alberta will mimic. These are, you couldn't pick worse models. The documentation, the harm that's been done to the public sector institutions, or as they say, the tertiary education sector in both the UK and Australia, is in a shambles. It's a horrible place to work. The research isn't done properly because because people are working countless hours to try to measure up on these ill thought out, misguided performance indicators. And in the end, it harms us all. We're all harmed by this redirection of what was a great university. The University of Alberta has been a fantastic model for what a Canadian university can do. And it's quite, well, I almost get emotional thinking about the changes that are being rammed through. I looked at some of the particular slides in the presidential address. And again, I'm not sort of blaming the president. From my perspective, he and the board are stuck in an impossible situation where the government is imposing these ill thought out frameworks and performance measures that will only do harm. There's no good is going to come out of this. They're not, they're modeled after institutions that are already failing in other countries. So, but some of the slides I saw would result in the drastic layoffs of hundreds, if not thousands, of NASA members. So that's basically, in a really quick nutshell, what I wanted to share with you, that if you can, these ill-begotten schemes must be exposed, and I think you're doing a wonderful job of that. I think if you don't just take my word for it, bring in other people, listen and learn to gain insights about how these work and what has worked from other places around the world to try to stop them. I'd have noticed, like I said, almost every given day or week, the government changed their mind on an indicator because they finally realized that it's completely nonsensical and almost, well, not almost, it's counter to even what they're trying to achieve. So I think you're doing the right thing. Try to bring in people who can illuminate a little bit, and I'm really pleased to be able to play some small part in that effort. And I can't stress enough how I'm so impressed that you're bringing me in and having these talks on your lunch hour. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I welcome the opportunity to come back at any time. And with that, I think, Prachi, I'll stop, and maybe we can take a breath, take a bite of that sandwich, or a drink of the coffee, and I'll do the same. I'll even mute my mic for 1 second and have a drink of coffee here.
All right. Thanks so much, Marc, for such an enriching talk, and for, even though it's very unfortunate to say the least, I'm glad that we are here talking about it, and I'm glad that we have someone of your expertise and background to be able to share your ideas on this. So before I open it up to the audience with their questions, I just have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you from the PAC committee. So one of the questions we thought of was, what are some actions that NASA members can take now against what we're seeing, this shift towards neoliberalization of our university?
Well, I think you're doing it. One is to try to get as much information as you can to see the roadmaps of how this has played out in other countries. And, um, you know, you don't have to guess at which models they're going to be using. They've already said the UK and Australia are their models for how to do this. And I can tell you there's reams of research, and I'm going to share some of it with you. Not today, but I will send you an email either after this talk with examples of what's happened there. So I think what you're doing now is one step. Get some information, get the language down, even to figure out what's going on. The lucky part for us is that we have 30 years of research on this from the UK, which started this in 1986, and Australia adopts it later. But we have decades of research from these countries about the harmful effects. So one, we know the language, we know what's happening. A lot of this kind of happens in sort of disaster capitalism shock doctrine way that Naomi Klein talks about, where you're left spinning because it sounds good. They use lots of good buzzwords, and I'll be damned if I don't put pivot in my talk today. We got to pivot because your talk is nothing if you don't have pivot in there. So essentially, they kind of bombard you with newspeak and things that sound good, like accountability and transparency. Who can be against those things? And yet, when you dig into it and see how it actually works, these are neither of those things. They're actually a redirection of the traditional mission of a university, which is entirely frightening to me. And it's also really a cutthroat sort of Hunger Games. If you know that movie, The Hunger Games, where people compete for ever diminishing pieces of food, in this case funding. So one, get informed. Two, I think really reach out to the other associations, the unions on your campus. For instance, I think the Faculty Association would be a great place to start, and the student union, but then also across your province. I think that these measures are designed to have you think as individuals, to have you think that there's no hope, to have you kind of fight and compete in a fixed game where you can't win, and then blame yourself because you didn't measure up to these ill thought out indicators. So the good part is that, like I said, we know what's happening across the world, and we know how they've engineered these changes. So that's good. I think that you're getting ahead of the game by having people come in and speak with you. And yeah, I guess that's a start. And I imagine your members maybe in the Q&A have lots of other good ideas as well that we can get into.
Yeah, thanks for answering that, Marc. And then one other question from PAX: what are some practical arguments that we can make to involve students and academics in opposition to some of these processes, these things that we're seeing happening?
I love the idea, and again, it shows the forward thinking of your association to be thinking about students. It sounds odd to say that that's a forward idea, but they often get left behind, even though they're increasingly the biggest funder. Their share of paying for the percentage of their degree program has been in a steady rise since the 80s. So where the government used to pay roughly 80% of the cost of a degree program, it's now down to about 50 or under. So students are increasingly shouldering the academic, shouldering the academic brunt of the academic load, the economic load of paying for their programs. So one, I think if students understand that these don't improve, none of these indicators improve their conditions, and they have been coupled with the rise in tuition. So I'm actually surprised that students haven't come out more against this, but again, students are placed in a very difficult position where it's hard to advocate for their own rights and still be part of the system. And perhaps in the past, this tactic has worked better with different governments, but it's certainly not working now. They're going to be paying a greater percentage of the cost of going to university, and that's going to be put onto their shoulders, that economic burden. So one, to understand that this isn't helping them just in terms of tuition, but tuition has to be seen in a larger framework of what's happening to the institutions across Alberta, and also, all of the public sector institutions. So, you can't just call for a tuition freeze without that being part of a larger analysis and a larger game plan about how we're going to restore funding and still maintain quality services at the university.
Thanks, Marc. Then we have a question from the audience. Where can we find data on the harms that have been done in the UK and Australia with these models? And just to expand on that a little bit, because I know you said you would share those links with us, which I will share to our membership as well. But could you give us like a quick summary, some specifics about what happened and what were the changes we saw in those UK and Australia models, and what were the results that were detrimental?
Well, essentially, most of the surveys show the stress levels are at extremely high levels, including, unfortunately, and I hate to bring this up, but they've gone so high that people have committed suicide over the stress levels of trying to maintain excellence as viewed under these performance-based indicators. So you have several cases, unfortunately, in the UK where people have, been in such devastated, dire straits that they've taken their own lives. And these are high-performing academics in this case. So that's an extreme example, and I don't want to really sensationalize this, but essentially the university becomes less and less inviting to work for. It becomes a high-stress environment, being asked to do more and more with less and less. A lot of the tuition costs are offloaded onto students, and it becomes where the university can't perform its function in the way that its aspirational ideals look for, in the hope that they create, like I said, creative and critical members of society who are prepared for future learning, who are well-rounded and can enter into different discourses within a society and into a community to better serve it and to better understand how to be, informed voters and participants in a democracy. And then on the research side, you have what happens is what we've seen a lot of is, unfortunately, fraudulent research because people feel extreme pressure to publish. They get often one solid piece of work gets salami sliced or placed into three smaller pieces because the metric was journal articles or citations. So again, I won't get into specifics about performance indicators, one, because your government keeps changing its mind about which ones they will be. But whichever one you choose, when you put so much pressure on it, it will pervert what it set out to measure. And this is an old concept essentially that the more pressure you put on an indicator, the less it becomes a good measure or reflection of what's happening, and instead becomes a driver. So people conform all of their energies towards doing well against that measure, which then changes the ultimate aspirational ideals and traditional missions of a university.
Okay, and then just to go a little bit off that, is there some specific research or background that you could point to about the impact NOUS has had on Australia and the UK?
I've been researching this too, probably much like your members. I'm trying to follow it as best I can. And the first I heard of the Nous group was watching the president's address, just the town hall not long ago. And then I started Googling Nous and asking colleagues about it. But I did find one or two documents that showed their plan. Essentially, it's all about restructuring and doing more with less, and amalgamations and staff layoffs, for all in the name of efficiencies. And they really lay out that blueprint. And it's an old trick. When you want to lay off people, you bring in a consultancy firm and kind of say, well, these experts are telling us to do this, and you do it, and it kind of shifts blame, and it kind of shifts everything to this consultancy group, which comes in, um, recommends massive cuts because those are the only things that can work into the confined parameters that have been made available to them, kind of like the Blue Ribbon Report itself. The Janice McKinnon's Blue Ribbon Report had very narrow parameters, so the only outcome could be massive cuts, restructurings, defunding of all sorts. And I think that this is, again, it's not a new technique, and when we're wise to it, we can see. But I have lots of questions that your members could maybe ask, like, uh, why Nous Group? How did they get chosen? Who did they go through some kind of call and evaluation process before they were picked? Did the government already suggest them? Did the Board of Governors, maybe through even certain Board of Governor members, maybe new members, get directed towards Nous Group? It's unclear to me how that group was that group in particular was chosen, and why you'd want to follow the UK and Australia as examples.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. And then we have a question that if you were the president of the U of A, knowing the constraints that we're facing today, what model would you believe would work for us to handle this, and why?
Well, I'm not the president of the U of A, but if I were, I think my first thing would be to call on the other presidents of each of the universities and institutions in Alberta, and have a real candid talk about how together we can try to oppose or resist these performance metrics as they're putting on. The massive cuts, uh, at some point you can't have a cheery face about them, that you can't just kind of stab departments and entire staffing situation and just cut them out, lay off thousands of people, and do that with a smile. That there's no sort of, as they say, lipstick on a pig that you can put on this. That this is a terrible situation, and the cuts are massive, and there's no way around it. So I have seen from other university presidents in Alberta where I've seen emails that they've sent out to their staff that put no happy face on this. Like, this is it, and the public needs to understand that. So I think that in the best way possible, faculty and staff need to inform the public that, and students and parents, that this is not helping. This is actually harming post-secondary education in Alberta. And I think, like I said earlier on, there's no easy way out for the president here. But to act like this is going to be a cheery good thing, I think is wrong. There's no way this is a good thing. This is not a good thing. So again, I'm not the president, and perhaps if I had more experience in admin, I would have a better or different answer. But that's not my job here, I guess. But I have kind of indicated what I would do if I were the president.
Okay. And then, do you think that these changes, are they strictly a change because there's a desire to cut costs, or do you think that there's a more an ideological element to it with some greater goal?
Oh, I think no doubt an ideological goal here. I think that the more you have universities be obedient and sort of domesticated, the less they can impose and critique the work that you do as a government, even though that work is deserving and ought to be open to critique. Yeah, certainly these cuts are both funding cuts straight off, and then they're also redirection of the mission of the university, and they're about silencing potential critiques as the program carries forward. And so I've always thought about the university in some ways are the public's watchdog on government because they're uniquely positioned to know the research and do the research that can illuminate how programs might not be the best. They're best positioned to do this kind of evidence-based policy work. And yet I think with governments we often see um, instead of a evidence-based policy we see sort of a creation of evidence to meet the policy, sort of a backwards. It becomes backwards. It's anyway. So I think that this is not an accident. No.
And do you have any ideas to demonstrate or how to demonstrate or persuade people who are committed to this idea of economic or corporate outcomes in the workplace and convince them of softer, quote unquote, ideas on outcomes on things like the social good, societal needs, and citizens? Like, how do we teach them that value?
Yeah, I think that um, no one knows which actions will lead to the desired change. When we're talking about like theories of change, how do we get to the desired changes that we're looking for? So I would say that any idea that people have in terms of actions are good ones because no one actually knows which one will be that catalyst to the change you're looking for. So one, you can try to work with the government, with reasonable members of the from the government ministry on down to the public servants who work within that ministry. That's one approach, and probably the approach that many administrators will take. But then I think there's a whole other piece where uh, you can inform parents and the public about how this will actually harm them. And me personally, I find that governments actually respond when they're embarrassed and called out in public. That actually op-ed pieces, letters to the editor, appearances on news media, those work. And so if your members don't feel comfortable doing those things because they may not have the same protections as faculty, that's why it's great to work with all the different organizations which are impacted negatively by these decisions. In private conversations or in closed Facebook groups, staff members can have those conversations where they might not be protected to be completely publicly outspoken about the issues. And then the faculty association can definitely speak out. Professors have academic freedom and tenure to speak out about issues. So they have more of the protections there, I think, to speak out. And again, I would try all of them because we can't know which potential ripple will lead to the change, the great sea change that we're looking for here.
Great, great. And then one question, as the performance-based funding model obligated to expose what amount of budget money is equated to 100% of accomplishing those results expected from the university, or is it left as a convenient moving target? It's a bit of a longer.
Yeah, I think right now it's essentially 15% of the university's entire operating grant is up in the air based on how they perform on these performance indicators. And I think that the indicators can change for one, and it's not exactly clear how much of the funding gets knocked off depending on the indicator. That, from my knowledge anyway, hasn't been announced yet publicly because they haven't announced the indicators that they're going to settle on. And so if they bring back the expenditure cap, for instance, that has a big ramifications for how the university operates. But they all appears to me, uh, and not just me, they're all about constricting budgets, making less funding available to universities.
And then one last question, actually, just for myself. So when I was watching the town hall, one talking point that I would hear a lot was that look at the UK's universities, they're much more highly ranked than the University of Alberta with much less funding. So how might you counter a talking point like that, which says, hey, look at these other universities who are better ranked than us with less funding, so why are we putting in more funding?
Well, the rankings themselves are a rigged game. I think you'll see, lo and behold, the old universities in the UK, like uh, especially the Russell Group ones, and essentially, Oxford and Cambridge, who have way more access to funds, and not just government funds, but vast holdings and endowments. It's a rigged game that you'll never win. Um, if the indicators came out and ranked Oxford and Cambridge not in the top 10, the indicators would change. They would actually change the rankings. And you can see this uh, when other universities come close, they usually let one in the top 10 to make it look like it's working. But essentially, they're a rigged game, and I don't pay them much weight. So the trick is not to brag when you do well on them, and not to feel too badly when you don't. The Canadian universities are world class, and you can see that in lots of indicators, not just these rankings. And so I wouldn't pay a lot of mind on those. Those are done by third party organizations. The metrics they use to rank the university are often in a black box. You don't actually know what they are and how they were weighted. You might know the general categories, but not the weight. And so I don't pay those much mind. They're all part of the larger academic capitalism game, where we're all in the business of trying to attract more students, different students, and retain them. And so if the branding and sort of rankings that come about through the various rankings, the people who perform these rankings and publish on them, if that helps us attract students, then universities tend to go along with it. Although it's also interesting to see that there are now, there's countless rankings, and universities go up and down like a yo-yo on them. And so I think that they get gamed as well. Just like all performance indicators, they get gamed to look the best. I remember at one point when the Maclean's rankings came out, that universities set up uh, committees to look better on them. So they would they would find out the indicators and then try to game them to look best so that you can move up or down in the next round. So I don't pay them much mind.
See any more questions from the audience. So I just want to say again, a deepest form of gratitude and thanks from us at PAC, at NASA, and our members for taking the time to come speak with us today and for giving us lots of thoughts as we move forward with some of our actions for advocacy. If anyone has any final questions, I see some thank yous in the comment section as well for your time. And we look forward to having you again, working with you again.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, and I really appreciate speaking with you. I hope some of what I said was relevant and came across all right. It's again quite strange to be talking to sort of myself on a screen, but again, I wish I could be there in person to speak to you in a live way and smile at you and see you frown when you don't like what I'm saying and things like that, so that I could respond in a better way. But it's been a wonderful opportunity, and I'll work with you as much as you want on this. This is we all have to work together, because what happens in Alberta is going to happen in Saskatchewan, and what happened in Ontario happens in Alberta, and you can just follow the dominoes across Canada. So I'm in 100%, and good on you for organizing this, and I look forward to future actions and activities and information sessions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then one note that we actually have extended the invitation for this Lunch and Learn to ASHWA, which is our academic staff association at the University of Alberta. So those members are here as well, and would want to thank you.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so to the NASA members and the ASHWA members and other folks who came out, thank you so much for taking this time to come out. We will record this, so we have been recording this session. We'll put it up on our website. We will also, I'll get those links that Marc was talking about the UK and the Australia research, that model, and we'll share those with you as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or reach out to the NASA exec, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Lunch and Learn.